Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks. Today, I'm joined by my wonderful co host, Sophie. Sophie, why don't you say hello to everyone?
Hi, everyone.
And today, we're joined by Sean Brecker, the Chief Financial Officer and board member of my favorite meditation app, Headspace. And there's some exciting news that Headspace and Ginger have merged to form Headspace Health. Ginger is a provider of on demand mental health care, and together they're creating a more accessible and comprehensive digital mental health and well being platform. Sean has helped lead their Series B and C, bringing their total funding to a whopping $215 million. Before Headspace, he spent 15 years in trading and origination at large investment banks like JP Morgan, Lehman Brothers, Citibank, and to top it off, he's a Wharton MBA. Thanks so much for joining us, Sean.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
And so, just to kick us off, I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on the rise of digital meditation. In the past, meditation hadn't really kind of been in, the limelight. I always think of like my dad living in Santa Monica going to an ashram. But with the rise, I feel like, of Headspace, it's become ubiquitous and everyone's talking about more mindfulness.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it's transformed dramatically in the, approximately 7 years that I've been at Headspace. So when I joined Headspace 7 years ago, I did not meditate myself. It just kind of never occurred to me. It was not in the zeitgeist. It was not a mainstream activity, even sort of more broadly, even away from meditation. I just think an awareness and a focus on one's mental health was not of paramount importance, in the way that it is or is starting to become today. And so I had never meditated, when I met the founders and when they recruited me. And I think, ironically, I had a lot of the same sort of almost implicit bias against meditation that, we've worked so hard to break down at Headspace over the last 7 years. So uh, Headspace was launched the company was actually founded in 2010. The app was launched. It was originally founded as an events company. The app was launched in 2012. It was then the world's first meditation app. It looked very different to the app that you see today. In 2012, you would open the app and it would just say play. There was literally one thing you could do, which was press play for that day's session, and then that was it. And you'd go back the next day and you'd hit play, and there'd be that day's session. There was nothing to select, nothing to kind of navigate. Um, and so, yeah, it was the world's first meditation app. Today, Apple tells us there are over 2,000 meditation apps in the App Store, which is crazy. But we're thrilled that others have kind of followed suit because it's led to this just awareness of the category, and it's led to this normalization of meditation and mental health more broadly. That has been, really powerful and has had a huge impact on millions and millions of people's lives. So yeah, nothing could be sort of more normal than the use of a meditation app or a sort of broader mental health and wellness app today, and we're thrilled about that.
Yeah, and like you said, right, I think, for a long time, people hadn't really been thinking about mental health or taking a break, in your long day of back to back meetings. But now more and more it's becoming accepted and encouraged, right, in the workplace, at home, to take some time for yourself to, check in with your body and in your breath, and kind of going back to kind of the evolution of Headspace, right, where you mentioned it started as an events company, which I had no idea, and that you just had one episode or kind of one session per day. I think one of the things that I've liked so much about Headspace is the experience of like packs, right? It feels kind of focused, and so instead of worrying about that decision fatigue, you have a pack on, say, just being a beginner and not being judgmental about starting out at meditation and feeling like I'm bad at it. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that evolution from events to one session to where we are now, which is really incredible when you open the app to see all of the options that you have, from fitness to focus to sleep.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think the important thing to say here is that there are two founders of Headspace, two British gentlemen, a gentleman named Rich Pearson, and another gentleman named Andy Puddicombe. And Andy has become sort of pretty famous as one of the world's best, meditation teachers. He's done his 10,000 hours and then some. So he spent 10 years as a fully ordained, Tibetan Buddhist monk. And so he's the one that is sort of the vision behind the teachings, at least the meditation teachings of Headspace. And so in those early days, when you just showed up and it was a linear journey, it kind of reflected the journey that he had learned, when he was spent all those years in monasteries. And so that journey started with, the basics, and then you would learn sort of different techniques as you progressed, and you might get to more thematic content on sleep, as an example, maybe 8 weeks into your journey. And what we kept hearing from our members were, we really love the product, but we want to have more flexibility to sort of do more thematic kind of packs, when we need them. So if I'm struggling with sleep, I don't want to have to wait 8 weeks. I want to, be able to do more sort of sleep oriented content, which, the sort of insight is fairly obvious, in hindsight, but the reality is, what is difficult to sort of educate folks on is that linear journey is helping with your sleep. It is helping with your stress. It is helping with your anxiety. So when you're doing the basics of meditation, even though that's not sort of framed as meditation content that is going to help you with sleep, it is day by day by day kind of helping you with sleep. But look, at the end of the day, we felt it was really important to give the flexibility to our members that they wanted and that they craved. And so in 2014, we launched a more modular version of the app that had sort of more of a library approach, where we still, strongly encourage folks to start with the basics, which was sort of 3 packs of 10 days, so a 30-day kind of session, and then you can go do whatever you want. But at the end of the day, if you didn't want to do the basics and you wanted to jump straight to sleep, or straight to stress, or straight to anxiety, or relationships, or focus, or whatever it was, we allowed you to do that. And that kind of ethos has remained since 2014.
I think what's interesting about Headspace is when you think about like mental wellness and health and meditation, there's so many different avenues. So you have the meditation, you have now alliances with like the MBA, and you have this like sports mindset coaching, you have sleep, you have anxiety. So when you look at the app as a whole, like where would you say that you're primarily focused? Is it meditation? Are you now diving into sleep? Are you turning into more of a coaching app? And like, why those focuses, and where do you think you see Headspace trending with all of these like wellness activities that are going on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we actually started the podcast by referring to Headspace as a meditation app, which I think a lot of people do. But to be honest, we view ourselves broader. We view ourselves as what we call a mental health and wellness platform. And so meditation is a really critical component of that. But as you said, Sophie, if you open up the app today, you're going to see tons of meditation content, but you're going to see tons of sleep content that has nothing to do with meditation, whether it's sleep casts or sleep sounds. You're going to see, focus music or focus playlists that are curated by another Penn alum, Mr. John Legend, who's our chief music officer. You're going to see the Wake Up, which is sort of a daily dose of inspiration to start your day. You're going to see mindful movement. So it really is a much broader platform. And that's really important to us for it's really critical around sort of delivery around our mission, which is to improve the health and happiness of the world. You know, it is people don't necessarily want to meditate every day. Sometimes it is really hard to even sit for 10 minutes, with your own thoughts. And sometimes you just want a quick dose of inspiration, or sometimes you might want to, move, or sometimes you just need help falling asleep. You may not want to do another meditation. So we think it's really important from a kind of promise to our members perspective, but it also is really important from a commercial perspective, because the data says if you can get members to interact with different types of content, they're going to have much stickier, kind of healthier journeys through the product, which is obviously really important to us.
Definitely. And I saw that Headspace is coming out with a documentary or a movie on Netflix, The Guide to Sleep, which I thought was a really interesting partnership and really slick strategically. So I'd love to hear more about like why the partnership with Netflix and what you're hoping to gain out of that alliance. And I guess just like overall, it seems like doubling down on sleep from a meditation perspective is a little bit of an internal trend. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, this is something that we've been working on with Netflix for some time. So, they approached us as, I would like to think that definitive brands in the space uh, to do a show with them. Actually, the first season is already out, which is called the Headspace Guide to Meditation. That dropped on January 1st. It's a as will be the case with season two. It's an animated series, sort of focused on meditation. So I highly encourage you to check it out if you haven't seen it. It's awesome. Season two is coming out in a couple weeks, which, as you
Mm-hmm.
said, Sophie, is going to be called the Headspace Guide to Sleep. And then season three will be coming out later in the year, which is going to be more of an interactive. So if you've seen sort of Black Mirror, Bandersnatch,
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of replicating and some degree enhancing that format, and with a an interactive special with Netflix. So we're huge admirers of Netflix. It's a great way for us to drive, again, continue to kind of drive the normalization of mental health, and to drive awareness of our brands, not just in the US, but obviously Netflix has a huge international presence. And so it's been really beneficial to our international business as well. And yeah, we're early on in the partnership, but so far it's been just extremely successful.
And kind of on the topic of content and helping people engage with different sorts, it's interesting to see, right, this kind of broadening from just audio to video to like YouTube. And you kind of mentioned focus, and I was perusing, I'm a big fan of like lo-fi beats when I'm studying or working, and like came across that, and some music composed by Hans Zimmer, who's one of my favorite composers, mainly for the holiday soundtrack. I don't know if you guys
Yeah.
have heard it. I'd highly recommend checking it out. But I'd love to hear, you were mentioning, right, kind of finding ways to help make users more sticky. And so I see that, one way is through kind of the packs, right? You encourage them to kind of come back, set a time of day to meditate or to, check in, or, fitness. And then there's also these different types of mediums to kind of encourage people to engage. So I'd love to hear, how have you all been thinking about, those different modes of content?
Yeah, I think that this is one of the biggest areas of focus for us, which is around sort of discovery. I think for a long time, so the app's been around for 9 years now, and for a long time it was basically sort of self-service. There's a big library, but you'd come to Headspace, and if the three of us all came to the app at the same time, we'd see the same thing. It was not customized, not personalized. There wasn't a ton of kind of guidance of, hey, you tried this, maybe you should try this, or why don't you do this as your next kind of session. So that's all changing. We've got a pretty big investment in machine learning, and if you've seen the app recently, you will have seen that we, pretty recently kind of reconfigured the home screen. It now has what we call these dynamic member journeys. So bit by bit, everyone's journeys are going to look a little bit different. They're going to become more personalized, right? Based on implicit and explicit signals around, what we think is the right content to serve you at the right time. And so we're just getting going on that, with that kind of strategy. But that's something that we're going to really lean into, because it can be overwhelming, right? Sometimes you don't know what you need. Like, you just know that you're feeling anxious, or maybe you guys have a test coming up, or maybe you're getting on an airplane, or maybe you can't sleep, or maybe you've got a big game on the sports team that you're participating in. And so we are going to get a lot more intelligent around surfacing the right content at the right time. That's sort of a big area of investment for us over the next, well, I think it'll continue in perpetuity, but big area of investment for us in 2021 and 2022.
That's awesome. And I think with all of these apps out now, like personalization is key. Chris and I always laugh because it's like there's always some sort of algorithm with machine learning and everything is becoming super personalized. But I think with the technology, it's just like funding and forcing all of these things into existence that we didn't have previously. And it's just really exciting for the space, especially when it's something so personal to you. So with that, I'd love to know like where Headspace is going to position itself, because it is a digital health app, but then there's these different applications that you have. So you have meditation that feeds into digital health with like mental health and wellness, because you can tackle like just being open and speaking about different aspects like anxiety, or you said like test taking. So I feel like there's a lot of different avenues that you could take. So when you think about like strategically where you're going to position yourself with all of these different meditation apps and, mental health and wellness apps, like where do you see yourself positioning in that landscape?
Yeah, so I'll go back to kind of what I said earlier, which is,
Mm-hmm.
our product and our business is really a digital mental health and wellness
Mm-hmm.
platform. So that's the starting point.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, competitive positioning, I'd say there are a couple things that differentiate us from competitors. I'd say the first is a commitment to science, and I think dovetailed with that is authenticity. So regardless of whether we are teaching meditation or whether we're coaching you on movement or whether we're helping you focus, we want to have genuine experts in each of those fields kind of guiding you. So not just Andy, but folks like, you mentioned Hans and John Legend, our instructors in mindful movement are all, extremely sort of accomplished and authentic experts in that space. But I guess going back to what I was saying around science, we've had a commitment to science for as long as I've been at Headspace. In fact, it predates me. So even when I joined in 2014 and we were roughly a dozen people, we already had a science team. We've been doing scientific research, measuring the efficacy of the products for 7 or 8 years. And so we have over 25 papers in peer-reviewed medical journals that have been published. We have another, I lost track, but 35 or 40 that are in the pipeline. And so that's very important to us. Like we want to make sure that when we're shipping products, it really works and it's backed by authentic expertise and validated by science. That's a huge differentiator for us. I'd say the other is just the brands. We have
Mm-hmm.
built a really iconic, lovable brands in the space. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and sometimes that's important because these are serious topics, and we want to make sure that we're obviously being respectful of the underlying conditions that we're treating, but we're also providing what we call sort of moments of magic to our members, moments of levity, moments of enjoyment, etc. That ultimately combine to just make the product that much more accessible, which is really important to us. So I'd say those are kind of the two areas that we differentiate ourselves on.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, kind of like the moments of magic and kind of playfulness is one of the things I think that caught my attention early on. I love the graphics. Andy's voice is just so soothing and so encouraging when you're starting out, even when you've done it a couple times. But I think that makes it really accessible and kind of going into the science aspect of things. I was looking at like Headspace for work and looking at how, right, the studies that you guys have kind of done have shown how it can reduce stress by like 14%, or burnout by like 22%, which is, I think, really, really compelling. And actually, something I noticed when I was at a startup and actually first started using Headspace because I was like, oh, I'm so stressed. What do I do? And just going through those basics for 10 days and seeing like I know felt a measurable change in my life. So on kind of the business side of things, I'm curious to learn more about like that kind of strategy. I think that we're seeing more and more companies are offering Headspace at work. There are partnerships that you guys are having now with like Starbucks and Amazon and Nike, and so finding mindful moments in different aspects of your life, like when you're getting coffee or you're going for a run, but even at the workplace. So I'd love to hear more about like that kind of new customer segment.
Yeah, well, Headspace for Work is really, really important for us. Again, for delivery against a mission, but also from a commercial perspective. So, what's happened in the workplace, and I think COVID was a huge accelerant for this. We had this thesis that employers would recognize that the health and well-being of their employees should actually be their top concern. If you have employees are basically the vast majority of your expense base for most organizations. And if your employees are stressed and not sleeping well and anxious and unfocused, that has a massive impact on your organization's productivity. What ended up happening is, and so we thought that would play out, over several years, and we stood the B2B business up back in, 2018 was really the first full year of operations. What ended up happening in early 2020 was obviously COVID hit, and our thesis just became accelerated sort of dramatically. So what ended up happening is, unsurprisingly, employers reached out in droves saying, hey, our employees are incredibly stressed out because the world's completely changing on a dime, And we need proven, we need tools that are proven to be effective, that are massively scalable to help with the mental health crisis that is happening, almost overnight in organizations of all shapes and sizes. And so there's some interesting stats around this. CB Insights did this really cool research study where they took public companies and they listened to their earnings calls and they tracked how many times the CEOs of these companies mentioned employee mental health as an issue. And they looked at this going back a few years. And so, I can't remember the exact numbers, but basically it was something like, mental health would be mentioned, 20 or 30 times a quarter across sort of the public market universe. And then COVID hit, and in the first, earnings calls, basically the Q1 earnings calls that all happened in sort of April, May, there was like a 6 to 7x spike in the number of times that mental health was referenced in these earnings calls. And so, and you see it everywhere. I mean, you're seeing all kinds of Fortune 500 leaders just talking about the mental health crisis in the workforce. Just over the weekend, I was reading a really interesting report from McKinsey around the same thing. And so, employers need, scalable, effective tools to confront this. And, Headspace for Work is sort of one of the best tools out there. And so as a result, that's a business that's growing at, many multiples, sort of year over year. That is of just, extreme kind of strategic importance to us around delivery against a mission, because, as kind of working adults, we spend the majority of our lives either at work or asleep. And so, you need tools that are going to help employees, where they are, which is, when they're awake, is the majority of their time in the workforce.
Definitely. And the B2B aspect of Headspace is really interesting to me and just super smart strategically, ton of opportunity. And thankfully, companies are now switching their focus where employees are critical to their businesses and they should be paying attention to mental health and wellness. So great that it's trending that way. But speaking of, B2B and the partnerships, have you seen, or like what opportunities have you seen from that aspect? Because you have like the pure B2B with like Headspace at work, but then you also have really interesting partnerships with like the NBA and I think it was the women's soccer team
Soccer.
as well,
Yeah.
where you're switching into this like performance mindset where it's more aligned with goal setting and how you can use the app to focus on the specific goals or assets or just like personality traits that you're striving towards to make you successful in whatever you're doing. So I'd love to hear more about those partnerships as opposed to like your standard Headspace at work, like how that works and what you see opportunity wise from that aspect.
Yeah. So partnerships is kind of a tool that we've used for years. A really effective tool around driving awareness and again driving normalization of our product and sort of mental health more broadly. And they take all kinds of different forms and shapes and sizes, right? So the partnerships that we've done with the NBA or with Major League Soccer or with the women's national soccer team, et cetera, you're right, Sophie, have been aimed more around performance and around driving awareness of Headspace as a tool for honing mental performance. I mean, this is the thing that's so powerful about Headspace is it can be used for so many different things, right? One
Mm-hmm.
person might be using it because they're really anxious and they're trying to kind of fix that horrible feeling of just sort of crippling anxiety, and another person may be using it because they're really trying to crush a performance, whether it's on the field or whether it's on the stage or in a test, etc. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff in between, right? Relationships, creativity, focus, the list kind of goes on and on, right? And so what our approach is around partnerships is really sort of cherry picking the kind of best brands in given spaces to help us really drive awareness of the product as a tool for whatever the case may be, whether it's performance in the case of sports, or whether it's more around sort of relaxation and calm in the case of, Starbucks as an example.
Is there one area that you'd like to see grow more? So you have like the performance, you have
Yeah.
the work, mental wellness, you have the meditation. Is there one area that you think is going to be really popular or you would like to see become more popular in the next year?
So I'd love to see us do more with kids. We're already doing a ton with kids because, if you can get kids to adopt mindfulness and just sort of mental health and wellness at an early age, it just has outsized returns, later on in life. So we've done a number of things around kids. We have an amazing partnership with Sesame Street. If you have not seen this, I encourage you to Google it. You can find it on YouTube. You can also find elements of it within our app, where we have an animated series with Sesame Street. So Andy is an animated character in Sesame Street. Working with the Cookie Monster around patience is really really special. We have a partnership. Well, we have partnered with several school districts across the country. Our goal is to make Headspace available for free to any teacher that wants it. And so we have done that typically through school district partnerships where we make it available for free to all the teachers in given school districts. So right here in Los Angeles, we have a big partnership with Los Angeles Unified School District. A little sort of older demographic, but we have an amazing partnership with Snap. We were one of the launch partners for the Minis product, which has had huge engagement in the kind of 13 to 18-year-old demographic. So we're just getting started around our work with kids, but that's an area that is really important. It's near and dear to me as a dad, but I think it can also just have a huge impact on just again improving the health and happiness of the world. If you can get kids adopting these tools at an early age, over generations, you can have big impact.
Definitely. And I not to harp on all the partnerships, but I was reading about the Snap partnership, what I found really interesting because you have all of these, the younger Gen Z population is grown up. I mean, I thought I grew up with technology, but it's like a whole nother world out there and it can be kind of cruel. So I feel like with Headspace and the partnership with Snap, it was more around, checking in with people to make sure, their day's going well or more of like the kindness element. So do you see that with the younger generation on like Headspace? Do you see yourself launching some sort of like, social media kindness campaign?
It's certainly something we've talked about. I mean, we do like the ethos of our app is, well, we're all about kind of teaching people empathy and kindness. Like it's just an undercurrent of sort of everything that we do, even within the culture of our organization and our workforce, sort of people being mean or bullying or even just sort of arrogance or these are not things that are sort of tolerated within our organization. I would say there's sort of a natural cultural tissue rejection around those things. And so yeah, we're always striving for how can we teach folks regardless of age to be more kind, to be more empathetic, to be more patient, and ultimately to have compassion. That is really really important to us.
And kind of on like exploring these like new frontiers of content of age groups, I'm curious, like what are you like most excited about, for Headspace? I know kids is definitely one of them, but I'm curious if there are, I don't know, new mediums of content, like you'll be on Clubhouse or TikTok, or if there are other exciting things that you're looking forward to in the next coming years.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've really made a lot of progress around off-platform content in the past year, under the amazing, leadership of our chief products and content officer. Um, and so Netflix is a good example. I talked about Sesame Street. We do have a podcast network. The sort of flagship podcast is called Radio Headspace, which has been featured by Apple many times. And so all of these sort of off-platform plays, and we're going to do more and more of this stuff because it's really, well, it's really important on two fronts. One is it allows our members to engage with us in sort of multiple mediums, and sometimes, going back to the point I made earlier, you might not be ready or in the sort of frame of mind to sit down for 10 or 20 minutes and meditate, but you might really be in the frame of mind to sit down and watch a 20-minute Netflix show, on the Headspace Guide to Meditation or the Headspace Guide to Sleep. So it allows our members to engage in sort of multiple modalities, which is really important. But it also obviously does an amazing job of driving awareness back to the products. And again, sort of normalizing this as a practice. And, that's really important for us. So it's still early days. We've had some huge wins, already, but we're going to continue to lean into that. And that's something I'm really excited to see develop. That also means going international. So, our core, core product, the core subscription business is already a pretty global business. I mean, we have members in 170 countries. The product has been translated into 5 languages, but we will start to look at off-platform internationally too as well.
Definitely. And so we've heard about what you think of the future, what you're interested in, but love to hear more about just like your overall journey and what brought you to Headspace and like why meditation, because you've been at Headspace now for 7 years, which is super impressive. Made a lot of moves, but it's a great area to be in, and now it's definitely booming. So for all of our listeners out there, us Wharton students are always looking for, how do you spot these trends and how do you know when something is going to be successful? Don't know if it's luck or skill or whatever it may be, but would just love to hear about your journey and what brought you to Headspace and meditation.
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I could pretend it was all skill and I was just clairvoyant, but the honest answer is it was a lot of luck. So when I graduated from Wharton way back in 2003, I went to work in investment banking and specifically as a derivatives trader, and I worked in London. And my best friend, I grew up in London. I'm American, but I grew up in London. And my best friend from high school had never left London, so he was still living in London, and he was in the advertising industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I moved from Philadelphia to London after graduation, I spent a lot of time with him, and sort of his friends in advertising were my kind of social network. And one of those people was Rich Pearson, the founder of Headspace. So we became, pretty good friends, and sort of remained so. But in 2007, I moved to Singapore, and I kind of lost touch with Rich a little bit. Um, so I continued to do derivatives trading, working for large investment banks in Asia. And in 2014, my wife and I decided to move back to the States with our 3 young children. And I planned to take a year off and try and figure out what to do next. Because I wouldn't say I was disillusioned, but I felt like my learning curve had kind of flattened out in investment
Mm-hmm.
banking. And I thought I wanted to, change careers. And about 3 weeks into that year off, after we'd moved to Los Angeles, Rich reached out to me on Facebook and said, "Hey, we kind of lost touch, and I also recently moved to LA, and let's get together." We got together, and I'd heard through our mutual friends that he had left the advertising industry and was doing something in meditation, but I didn't really know anything about it. And we got together for breakfast, and he started telling me all about this meditation app that he'd founded with this former Buddhist monk. And I was thinking in my head, man, this guy's really lost the plot. Like he had this amazing career in advertising, and now he's doing this super weird meditation app with this monk, and it's never going to work. And this sounds like a terrible idea.
Oh, that's amazing.
Uh, but I was very polite to him, and I was sort of nodding and said, "Oh, cool, cool." And then he said, "Look, we're a small team. We're like 10 or 12 people, and we're mostly designers and creatives and content people, and we don't have anyone that's sort of analytical and understands finance. And we're maybe thinking about raising capital, but we don't even know what that means and whether we should do it or not do it. And do you want to come help us?" And so I thought, yeah, I've got all the time in the world. Let me go help him. And it sounded interesting. And like I said, I didn't meditate. And he had sent me a subscription, and I started meditating, just 10 minutes a day. And over the span of 3 weeks, my sleep went from, I was sleeping like 4 hours a night to almost 8 hours a night over the span of 3 weeks. So then I was like, wow, this is incredible. Let me read about the science of meditation. I started doing more reading about the science of meditation. And then I started thinking about the business, and I thought, okay, well, you record all this content yourself. It's all audio content. You own the IP. It's evergreen. And you can, people are paying you for this. Like people are already subscribers. And so I thought, it could be really interesting from a business perspective too. So So I decided to join the team, and Rich and Andy were very gracious in saying, "Hey, just come and help us." And I said, "Look, I'm a commodity derivatives trader from Asia. I don't know the first thing about startups. I don't know the first thing about venture capital. I don't know how to be an operator of a startup." And they said, "Yeah, but you're analytical and we trust you, and like, well, let's just go figure it out together." And that's basically the journey that we've been on for 7 years. So definitely serendipity, not skill. But it's been an incredible journey, the journey of a lifetime, and one that I'm very, very grateful for.
Yeah, I mean, what an incredible journey. I mean, just like from, kind of being friends in London and then, kind of running back into each other kind of serendipitously, in LA. And I mean, it just like sounds like such an exciting journey, right? Like, kind of being your first time kind of, trying to raise venture capital funding and it going so well. But but I think that's one of the things that's so exciting for I think many of us at Warden. And when we think about, starting something, getting into startups, getting into venture capital, and doing something that's a little bit unknown, right? I think one of the big appeals of an MBA is many times right, switching careers or doing something completely new and fresh and pursuing your dreams. And it sounds like that's kind of what you've been doing.
Yeah, yeah, I've been really fortunate, to do that. And I think the sort of common thread along the way has been just be honest around, what you know and what you don't know. And I think what served us really well is being almost shameless around asking for help and asking for learnings from folks. So in those early days, I mean, we would take meetings with anyone that we could get a meeting with to just try and understand, what does it mean to be an operator? What does it mean to raise capital? What does it mean to do performance marketing? What is optimal org structure? Like really studying culture within startup organizations. How do you maintain culture as you scale? There were so many topics in those early days that we were very honest around sort of our shortcomings, and had that beginner's mind around going to try and try and really learn from experts on. So yeah, that would be a sort of piece of advice that I would give for folks looking to make a similar career switch or embark on a similar journey.
What were some of the things that you struggled with early on? And I guess how did you end up securing VC funding or backing? So like what was the aha moment or your like breakaway where you finally felt like, okay, I'm secure in this crazy VC world. We've made these connections and we feel like now like our next series are going to go a little bit more smooth and we can secure this funding and backing easier than before.
Well, I think, the honest answer is the founders were a little nervous around raising capital,
Mhm.
back in 2014, because they viewed this very much as sort of their life's work. And they had built this not, to become, successful tech entrepreneurs, but really to scale health and happiness. That was the singular lens that they viewed, everything that they were going to build through, and honestly continue to today. And so we met so many VCs. We met about 65 VCs through the Series
Wow.
A process. And we were fortunate in that we had several term sheets because the traction was there, like this was,
Mhm.
you could feel that this was starting to change, that people were taking mental health more seriously. And you could feel that it was starting to become a little bit more normal. I don't think anyone dreamed, even us, back then, that it would be where it is today. It's sort of, I think, beyond all of our wildest dreams. But I think the VC community was pretty bullish on the product and on the sort of early traction and on the ability for this to scale. And so raising capital was not, while we met tons of firms, it was more to get ourselves comfortable with what it meant to actually have an investor, be on our cap table and be on our board, and what that kind of marriage would look like. But the actual, getting term sheets was not particularly difficult for us, and we've been really fortunate around raising capital that that's kind of been the case as we've continued to raise, more and more capital.
Mhm.
And I'm also pleased to say that, our investors have just been amazing, like just incredibly, incredibly supportive and constructive. And I think, are a huge part of the reason for, why we've gotten to where we're at.
Amazing. It's such an interesting and exciting story, and I guess gives us some hope in when we try to raise some venture funding in the future. But coming to our last question, we really love to ask this kind of fun question, which is, what is your boldest, most interesting, unique prediction of how the world is going to be different in 5 to 8 years from now? What do you believe in your heart will happen, even though it seems like kind of a moonshot for everyone else?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So, I'm biased because obviously I'm really passionate about mental health. And I don't even know if this is a moonshot because I think we're on this path. But I believe, over the next 5 years, mental health is basically going to get to parity with physical health. So today, if you go on Instagram, or if you are a consumer of pop culture or movies, or everyone sort of talks about working out and eating right. And 5 years ago, no one talked about mental health, right? And taking proactive measures to ensure that you are as mentally healthy as you are physically healthy. And I think that that's really changed. You've seen all kinds of folks, whether it's pro athletes, whether it's kind of actors, even politicians, certainly academics, hedge fund managers, so many different types of people from all walks of life have come out and have talked openly about the importance of mental health, and that you truly cannot be healthy if you are not mentally healthy. It's sort of the starting point. You can be ripped and have a six pack and look beautiful, but if you're not mentally healthy, like, you are not healthy. And I think that there's just this insurmountable kind of momentum behind that notion, and we're not at parity yet, but I think that we will get to parity, I think, over the next 5 years. And I can't wait for it because it'll just have such a huge impact on people's overall health and happiness. If we can get there, if we talk about mental health in the same open, honest kind of way that we talk about physical health.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm definitely looking forward to that, where everyone feels like they can live healthier, happier lives, and really focus on their mental health, and that they don't have to feel ostracized for talking about the things that they might be struggling with, or the wins they've had. So I'm definitely excited to see it become ubiquitous and on par with athletic and physical health. Maybe we'll see mental health influencers, and people more and more finding ways to kind of spread their flavor or their journey with mental health.
Yeah, let's hope so. That would be amazing.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Sean. We really appreciate you chatting with us. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.